Welcome back to the Blissful Badger. As we begin 2025, many people decide to do New Year, New Army, a new shiny item to start off a new year. And what better way than to spend a whole bunch of money on models that will get prioritized over others that you've already purchased. So this year, I decided, well, I already have a lot of models. I already have quite a few armies. What if I did New Year, Old Army? So I decided I would work on my Tyranids this year. It's not going to be the only army I work on, of course, but I decided I should start with my first army that I ever collected. I have quite a few minis in this army, and many of them are still not painted. A year and a half ago, I did an overview of my collection, and you can see I had quite a few only primed minis. And in the last year and a half, I have had a chance to paint some of these, but last year I only painted about a dozen. And that was way too few of my primary army. So this year, I'm going to change that. Let's get a lot of these painted. And with the theme of New Year, Old Army, I figured I would start with these really old minis that are now legends. They're not going to get to see the game board, at least not in any tournament play. But I own them, and they deserve a nice paint job so that they can go into the display cabinet instead of languishing on the to be painted side of the room. So we have a Dimachairon, a barbed Hierodule, and a scythed Hierodule, an old metal Broodlord, a converted Red Terror. How many of you remember the Red Terror? And 3 Malanthropes, and these all deserve some painting. So the first step, I always prime black with my Tyranids, and then I follow up with a Zenithal spray of khaki. I follow that up with a dry brush of khaki, and with the larger models, an additional lighter white so that there is more depth to the flesh. I have found that the Army Painter Speed Paint Pallid Bone makes a really good flesh tone for these Tyranids. And then this might be weird, but I use the hardened leather speed paint for their joints and any other gribbly areas that I feel like that would be a good thing. And then I do some highlight work with blood red and malignant green. These models to pop a little bit from the tabletop. They are quite large models, and I don't want them to just be monocolored, even with the contrast. My old color scheme had me doing multiple layers of stippling to get a skin tone, similar to a camo pattern. But with the release of the Leviathan box, I did change up my Tyranid pattern. I evolved it into the modern setting, and I find that the use of the contrast paints, speed paints, helps to speed up the process just a little bit. But I do still follow the same patterns with the carapace. And so the next step is to do a fully black layer, sometimes requiring 2 coats, to make the carapace consistently dark. Because I decided to do so many models at once, this step actually took me 8 hours And then, for the fun part, I chose a color for each of the minis, and I started feathering out the different parts of the carapace. The first layer is the basic color that I chose, and watered down just a little bit so that it kind of blends into the black. I don't want it to be a solid fade. I want it to show up, but I don't want it to be so bright that the transition screams at the person as they're looking at them. I want to make sure that this highlights all of the carapace and makes each panel show up. And then I follow it up with a slightly brighter mix of the base color and ivory. And then I actually take the time to make each and every little feathering line on these pieces. I find that this really does add the contrasting pop that these models require to actually look really good on the tabletop. And sometimes I'll take it and do one more layer just so that there's even more of that contrast. The last part of painting these up is I use a gloss black on the claws and hooves and anywhere else that I feel needs that gloss effect. So spikes and anything that would be used as a weapon, pretty much. And then they're painted up. Now the only thing I need to do is base them. If only I remembered to pick up some Agrax Earthshade. I guess this step's going to have to wait just a little bit longer, and another trip to the game shop. But until then, these models are going to get to enjoy some time in the painted cabinet. And it's so nice to actually see them behind the glass instead of waiting to be painted. So now I just have to figure out how to base my biovores and pyrovores on 80mm bases and paint up a couple hundred termagants and hormagaunts and such. Subscribe if you haven't so that you don't miss any future videos. I also want to thank my patrons and supporters for making these videos possible. And until next time, I hope you find your bit of bliss.